Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and you're listening to October's horoscopes. So this is the sun sign horoscope for Taurus for the month of October 2018. You can also use this always for your rising sign as well. That's always, sometimes people even look at it for their moon sign. So we're going to go ahead and just start by, here we go. Oops. Sorry, guys. Got this all, somehow my screen's all goofed up. Okay, here we go. Taurus on the ascendant. So it's a big month for Tauruses. Your home ruling planet, Venus, is going to be turning retrograde this month. That'll probably be one of the big highlights of this particular reading. So pay close attention to that. But let's go ahead and start. The month really gets started even prior to the Venus retrograde, which is until October 6th. On the 2nd, on October 2nd, you're going to see, let me annotate this for you so you can check it out. You're going to see a square from Mercury to Pluto. Now, this is a very dynamic square from the 6th house in Libra, Mercury in Libra, to Pluto in Capricorn in the 9th house. So first of all, the 6th house was traditionally called the joy of Mars, and it was considered classically a place of opposition. It's related to things like work, sickness, slavery, chronic illnesses, but also fighting for or serving things that you are passionate about. So with Pluto in the 9th house of the higher mind, this is probably a time that's very philosophical for you toward the beginning of the month, where you are considering new ideas and figuring out. Libra in the 6th is nice because even though it might be a little confrontational, a little bit edgy, the kinds of things you're thinking about or communicating about, the things that are coming up for conversation might be a little heavy or dark, or stuff coming up from the unconscious with Pluto involved. But it's all about trying to find the most eloquent, balanced way of enacting your philosophy in the world. That's the way that I would look at this transit. Or potentially issues about conflict in other countries, peacemaking, service and your beliefs, education, training, and being in service to a teacher, or the subject of learning and work in the field, and the difficulty or the stress of having to learn something really in depth, really intensely. And you could also see more confrontational dynamics where the stuff that's coming up is just a little bit heavier, and the idea of confrontation or some level of hostility in relationships generally or philosophically, different kinds of debates, things like argumentation coming up, that could be more pronounced. Okay, so going on from there, this is the big one, October 6th. October 6th, you'll see that Venus is going to be turning retrograde in Scorpio. And that's happening right here in the 7th house, which is the house of relationships. So Venus, planet that naturally signifies love and relationships, turning retrograde in a rather challenging place for Venus, Scorpio, and doing so in the house that's all about relationships. So this is a time where, things are going to be changing dramatically for your partner or for your partnership, either way, if you have one. If not, then you're single, then you are maybe in a period of time where you're coming to some important conclusions internally about relationships, your love life, or your relationship history. You may be revisiting with lovers or past romantic connections, lovers from the past or old flames or whatever. You could also be dealing with things from the relationship past coming up for review. And some of them could be, rather difficult or challenging, but there's growth and healing available as well, deeper level of honesty, getting to the bottom of things in relationships. It's also about your social image, how you're seen, how you want to be seen, the feeling that you might be going through some change in that's very fundamental about who you are, what you want, and in relation to the world and how other people see you. So those are some things to think about, but it's a pretty deep and intense time for relationships in particular. That's sort of quintessential Venus retrograde for you because you've got it in your 7th. So that's going to be pretty intense. And then you go forward from there, we get to October 8th. And on October 8th, there's a new moon falling in your 6th house. So again, the question of if you have employees, 6th house is a house of employees. If you have people that you hire, workers that work for you regularly, the new moon in the 6th house sometimes means you're going to be hiring somebody new or working with somebody new. It can also be, again, about conflict, sickness, service. So this with Libra in your 6th, thankfully there's the ability to have your Venusian creature. So having some balance in your relationships is natural for you. But this is a month with Venus retrograde where things aren't going to be as easy. So that new moon in Libra in the 6th is sort of like looking for peace amidst conflict. That's just kind of a general signature for the month, and the new moon just sort of echoing that. But also you could say that the 6th house is about, again, practically enacting your values in the world, issues of healing from sickness, issues of work, labor, how much you want to be working, changing something about your daily grind. So that's stuff that the new moon could be indicating. You go forward from there to October 10th and 11th, and you get into just a total traffic jam of planetary action. So the big one is that Venus will be square Mars from your 7th to your 10th, which is between partnership and career. So partnership and things happening in love life, and there being some immediate conflict or tension with things that are happening professionally or within your workplace, could be pretty dramatic around this time, especially given that simultaneously Mercury is going to be opposing Uranus across that first 7th house dynamic, that first 7th house axis, which tends to be about explosive, eccentric, and rebellious communication dynamics in relationships. So it could be that you are going through something that's a little bit more public in terms of your relationships. Like you might be dealing with changing your status on Facebook type of thing, or dealing with a divorce, or dealing with some kind of a more public exchange where your relationship and issues or challenges in your relationship that are happening are also somehow a little bit more public. That's possible, even though I can't think of a great example of what that would look like. But that, though, you could just think that there's more about your reputation that's on the line, or your life direction or your career or something like that, and thinking about how that coincides with things you're trying to deal with in your partnerships. Again, if you're single, might be a very interesting time for meeting people, though this could be a time where the kind of people you're meeting are like really outside of the box. Mercury opposite Uranus across that first 7th house axis can introduce you to people who think very differently from you, or who are encouraging you to think very differently. Some rebellious dynamics in relationships. It could be fun, exciting, and romantic, possibly, but also challenges to traditional authority. And you're thinking of, potential, again, sort of even sexual tension in the workplace. So yeah, I think that gives you an idea anyway of what's going on there. So pretty dynamic moment with these two transits perfecting simultaneously. It has the power to be creatively very dynamic, some very big breakthroughs that could happen, especially intellectually and, again, within your relationships, but possibly some power struggles as well. All right, so the very next day, as if that weren't enough, then you have the Sun getting in on it with a square to Pluto. And the Sun's square to Pluto from the 6th to 9th is echoing Mercury's earlier square to Pluto that we started the month off with, which means, again, it's a period of time where you could be putting there's some kind of training that's taking place, or some kind of intellectual breakthrough that you're having, something that's spiritual, but something that is forcing you to work or face some kind of internal tension or conflict. The things that come up during Sun square Pluto are often very illuminating, but they're sometimes heavy and difficult to look at. You might be ready to arrive at a more balanced and realistic perspective about yourself, about others, about the world. But it may require you to look very honestly and deeply at things that aren't necessarily pretty. That's part of Venus retrograde in Scorpio as well, or that aren't simple. And things that aren't simple and sort of beautiful are sometimes tough for the Venus-ruled signs, both Taurus in particular. But there's, of course, depth to all of us. It's not to say that you're not a deep person, but Tauruses aren't like is not the sign that you think of when you think of like the great, sort of intellectual qualities. Taurus has many of its own amazing strengths. This is one that could push you mentally and intellectually into some uncomfortable territory. But also, ultimately, I think there's practical value in it, which I think Tauruses appreciate. What can I do with this? How can I use this to take action in the world? And so those are questions that could be a very important part of your month ahead as well. All right. So again, 10th and the 11th, really pop in, though. Highlight your calendars around those dates. Now, when you go forward from here, we get to on, October 19th, one more day. October 19th, you're going to see Mercury squaring Mars from your 7th to 10th. Same themes repeating in the similar houses the whole month. So this one's a very analytically intense, mentally, intellectually, verbally intense transit, much more argumentative, potentially confrontational kind of quality, maybe involving authority or struggles with authority in relationships, and maybe more publicly somehow. But this is voicing something, standing up for something, getting to the bottom of something, having mental or intellectual breakthroughs, facing things that are a little bit more difficult in relationships, again, about things that are verbal or mental or intellectual maybe. So really you want to be patient, compassionate, and use this energy if you can to be intelligent, wise, careful, incisive, but not violent with anything mental, verbal, etc. Okay. So going forward from there, the final transit that I have for the month is the full moon, which also lands across your first 7th house axis. And by the end of the month, Venus retrograde will also be opposing Uranus in your first house. So from the full moon of the 24th through the end of the month, there's a lot of tension across the first house, 7th house axis, which can be very much about liberating yourself from different kinds of social conventions, liberating yourself from toxic or unhealthy patterns in relationships, breaking free from something, experimenting with something new, especially again in relationships, or a change of identity that is being worked out in a more public manner. And this full moon really says it's something about being more of yourself, and yet there's an inevitable value conflict with others that you love, potentially even, that has to be a part of it. So it's a time of balancing the opposites in your relationships. So that's what I've got for you this month, Taurus. I hope that this was interesting, and let me know feedback on the comment box on YouTube, and tell me how your month is going. Keep coming back to this and write some of your stories. I'd be really curious to hear about them. All right. Have a great month of October. Take care.